The kitchen always came alive just before sunset. Even after all these years, I felt it in my bones, the subtle thrum in the air, the way the light slanted through the back windows and danced across the stainless steel, the distant sound of laughter and conversation in the dining room as the first guests arrived. My days had become a pattern as predictable as the changing of the seasons. I woke before dawn, started my coffee before the world outside even considered stirring, and arrived at the restaurant long before anyone else. By the time the other cooks filtered in, I'd already checked the deliveries, written out the specials, and wiped down the counters until they shone. Being the chef meant more than giving orders, it meant setting the tone, holding the line, never letting my guard down. I wore my white jacket like armor and moved through the kitchen with a certainty I'd earned over decades. Staff rotated in and out. Faces changed. But the kitchen itself never really did. There was a rhythm to everything, the chopping of onions, the steady hiss of garlic hitting the pan, the snap of fresh herbs as they were torn and scattered into sauces. I knew every drawer, every knife, every finicky burner and loose tile underfoot. The crew respected me, sometimes feared me, but they worked hard. I expected nothing less. It was easier to keep my distance, to stay the authority figure, to focus on the food and the craft. That night, I learned there would be a new intern starting. The text from the manager came just as I was prepping a tray of vegetables, hands slick with olive oil and rosemary. I barely reacted. I'd seen so many young cooks come and go, eager, uncertain, desperate to prove themselves. I didn't expect much. When she arrived, she was precisely on time. I noticed her only in passing, the fresh uniform, the careful, respectful posture, the way she waited quietly until addressed. She had a certain energy, a stillness in her face that told me she was watching, absorbing, waiting for direction. I showed her around, told her what needed to be done, and left her with simple tasks, prepping mirepoix, peeling potatoes, lining up ingredients for the next round of orders. As the hours passed, I watched from the corner of my eye. She worked methodically, not rushing, not daydreaming. She cleaned as she went. She didn't ask unnecessary questions or fumble with tools. When she made a mistake, she fixed it herself. The rest of the crew fell into the usual rhythm. Orders flew in, voices raised and faded, the heat from the stoves grew thick, the air filled with the mingling scents of butter and thyme and seared meat. I worked in my usual bubble, hands moving almost on instinct, tasting, adjusting, plating, double-checking every dish before it left the pass. But I kept noticing her, how she moved a little closer whenever I needed something, how she anticipated when a bowl would be needed, or stepped aside just in time as I swept past. She became part of the kitchen's current, adapting seamlessly to the chaos, and I found myself oddly grateful. After service, I stayed to close. The kitchen felt quieter, emptied of the day's urgency, the white noise of fans humming softly. She lingered too, wiping down the counters, organizing the walk-in. I let her work beside me, comfortable in the silent routine of it all. I caught her glancing at me once or twice, curious, maybe nervous, but she kept her focus. By the time we were done, the kitchen gleamed again, ready for another day. I shut off the lights and stepped outside, feeling a strange, unfamiliar flicker of anticipation in my chest as I locked the door behind me. Over the next few weeks, she became an extension of my own movements in the kitchen, slipping into the patterns of our routine with an ease that surprised me. Each morning, I would arrive to find her already there, apron tied, hair pulled back, hands busy with prep work. She understood the rhythm before I ever explained it, how the knives should be stacked at the end of the station, how the cutting boards had their proper place, how silence was sometimes more efficient than words. I learned her habits as she learned mine. She moved with quiet intention, anticipating my needs before I spoke. If I reached for a mixing bowl, it was already waiting beside me. If I needed a sprig of thyme, she would pass it over without looking up, as if she had read my mind. She picked up the tempo of a busy service night instinctively, speeding up or slowing down depending on the pressure in the room. There was something gratifying about watching her grow more confident. She found small ways to help, scraping down the line after a rush, refilling water glasses for the cooks when no one else remembered, slicing herbs into perfect ribbons while keeping her station immaculate. She listened closely, observing not just my words but my actions, and over time I realized I didn't have to check her work anymore. I began to trust her judgment, let her finish sauces or garnish plates when my hands were full. She adapted to my moods too, sensing when to offer a quiet word or when to leave me alone with my thoughts. Our hands sometimes brushed as we passed utensils back and forth. The contact was always brief but electric, an unnoticed spark that left a tingle in my palm. The rest of the staff started to notice how well we worked together. Some joked that I finally had a sous chef who could keep up with me. I found myself depending on her more and more, letting her step in when I was running behind or when the dinner service became a blur of shouting and smoke. She became my silent partner, my second pair of hands, and together we moved through the long, hot hours as if we shared the same brain. There were moments when I would pause and watch her work, noticing how she bit her lower lip when concentrating, or the way her eyes would flick to me for approval after sending out a perfect plate. Sometimes, late at night after the kitchen emptied, we lingered over cleanup, finding comfort in the small routines, the scrape of a spatula on the grill, the low hum of the refrigerators, the faint echo of music from the dining room. There was a new sense of ease between us, an intimacy born not from words but from unspoken understanding, a quiet partnership that made the chaos of the kitchen almost feel like home. It was one of those late nights that seemed to stretch on forever, when the restaurant had finally emptied and only the two of us remained in the kitchen, bathed in the golden haze of low light reflecting off the tiles. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and warm bread, mingling with a sweetness from the dessert we were perfecting for the next menu. The world outside felt distant and muffled, as if all that mattered existed within the quiet orbit of our shared space. We stood side by side at the prep table, her hands busy whisking cream while I carefully folded chocolate into batter. The music from the front was faint, barely more than a gentle rhythm we both moved in time with. There was a comfort in that silence, a feeling that nothing needed to be said. I leaned forward, reaching for a bowl just out of arm's reach, when she stepped behind me to steady it. Her hand found my waist, firm and warm, steadying me so I wouldn't tip the whole mixture onto the floor. It was such a simple gesture, unplanned, almost instinctive. The weight of her palm lingered against my side, her thumb pressing lightly against the fabric of my jacket. For a split second, time slowed, and I became hyper-aware of the shape of her hand, the strength in her fingers, the softness of her touch. My breath caught in my throat, and something inside me shifted, a sudden flush blooming beneath my skin. She didn't pull away immediately, and I realized I didn't want her to. I felt my body leaning, unconsciously, into her support. The heat from her hand traveled through my whole body, settling in places I'd long forgotten could feel so alive. When she finally let go, her fingertips traced a small, involuntary line along my hip. I could still feel her there, even after she turned back to her own station. My mind raced with questions, but none of them made it to my lips. Instead, I kept working, but every task felt dreamlike and heavy, my senses heightened by the memory of that brief contact. For the rest of the night, everything between us felt charged with new energy. Every movement, every accidental brush of arms, every shared glance seemed to carry a quiet significance. She passed me a spoon, and our fingers touched for a heartbeat too long. She leaned close to check a sauce, and I caught her scent, something warm and faintly floral. I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts were scattered, circling back again and again to the feel of her hand on my waist. The kitchen, once a place of strict order and discipline, became softer, stranger, filled with the anticipation of something neither of us dared name. We finished cleaning up, moving a little slower than usual, drawing out the tasks as if we both wanted to postpone leaving this fragile space. When I finally turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool night, I could still feel the ghost of her touch, imprinted on my skin, a secret I carried home with me and relived in the darkness, wondering if she felt it too. It happened on a night when the city outside seemed wrapped in velvet, the lights blurred through the windows and the noise faded to a hush, as if the world itself wanted to step aside for what was coming. We stayed late after service, both of us pretending there was more to be done, lingering over closing tasks that could have been finished hours before. The kitchen glowed with the soft warmth of under-cabinet lights, every surface wiped clean, the air scented with the memory of cinnamon and citrus. I moved around the space slowly, aware of every sound, her quiet footsteps, the gentle clatter of utensils, the creak of the old refrigerator. Each moment seemed to gather weight, to bend time around us. She stood by the window, drying her hands on a towel, the pale gleam of her skin stark against her dark uniform. I watched her for a moment, trying to steady my breath, my heart thudding in my chest as if I'd just run up a flight of stairs. There was a hush between us, a quiet full of possibilities, and when our eyes met across the room, it felt like we both finally acknowledged what had been building in the silence. I crossed the space between us, drawn by a force I could no longer deny, my hands trembling only slightly as I reached for her. She met me halfway, her body warm and solid, her breath a soft exhale against my cheek. I brushed a strand of hair away from her face and let my fingers linger there, memorizing the line of her jaw, the gentle curve of her mouth. The air between us was electric, tense with anticipation. When I finally closed the distance, our lips met with the gentlest pressure, an uncertain, searching kiss, both of us testing the truth of what we'd been feeling. Her hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and the simple act of her holding me like that sent a jolt through my entire body. I pressed my mouth more firmly to hers, letting myself fall into the warmth and softness of her. My arms slid around her shoulders, and I felt her melt into me, her fingers splaying wide against my back. She tasted like wine and oranges, something bright and intimate. When her tongue traced the seam of my lips, I opened to her, surrendering every last scrap of doubt or fear. Her touch was hungry, searching, as if she was trying to learn me through sensation alone. We moved together, slow and unhurried, letting the tension unravel at its own pace. She guided me gently, her hands slipping beneath my jacket, finding the heat of my skin. My body came alive under her touch, every nerve sparking, every muscle aching for more. I tugged at her shirt, desperate to feel her without barriers, and she let it fall to the floor, never taking her eyes off mine. I traced her shoulders, her collarbone, the delicate line of her ribs, and she shivered under my hands, drawing me closer. We found our way to the small couch in the break room, half laughing, half breathless, our bodies tangled in the half-light. She knelt over me, her thighs bracketing my hips, her mouth exploring my neck, my collarbone, the hollow between my breasts. I arched into her, gasping as she undid the buttons of my uniform, her hands slipping inside, discovering my skin inch by inch. Every touch felt like a question, every sigh an answer. My fingers tangled in her hair as she kissed lower, taking her time, savoring every moment as if it might be the last. Clothes slid away, forgotten, until nothing separated us but the thin sheen of sweat on our skin. She worshipped me with her mouth, her tongue tracing slow circles, her hands gentle and insistent, coaxing me open until I was trembling beneath her, lost in sensation. I called her name in a broken whisper as pleasure crashed over me, her name the only thing that anchored me to the earth. When she finally lay beside me, her arms wrapped tightly around my waist, I held her as if I could keep the moment from slipping away. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The only language that mattered was the slow, steady beat of her heart against my chest and the warmth of her breath on my shoulder. I closed my eyes and let the quiet envelop us, feeling safer and more seen than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I let myself hope for something more than routine and duty. I fell asleep with her limbs tangled in mine, a part of me forever changed by the softness of her body and the courage it took to finally touch her. In the days that followed, the boundaries that once kept us apart dissolved so quietly it was as if they'd never existed. The kitchen remained our world, a place of rules and routines, but everything about it now felt infused with a private meaning. Every moment, every glance, every accidental brush of the hand became a secret memory only we could read. I moved through the restaurant's chaos with a new sense of purpose, my senses sharpened by the memory of her lips, her touch, her body pressed close to mine on that small, battered couch in the break room. It was as if the night had cracked open something deep inside me, and all I wanted was to keep tasting that forbidden flavor, again and again. We fell into a new rhythm, subtle and full of risk. Sometimes our hands would meet over the counter, fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary as we passed bowls or knives or tasting spoons. She would reach around me to grab a spice from the shelf, her body pressing lightly against mine, her breath warm against my ear, and I would tense, heart racing, doing my best to act as if nothing had happened. She started wearing her hair down more often, letting curls spill across her shoulders, catching the light as she worked. I found myself watching her constantly, watching the way she laughed with the dishwashers, the way her lips pursed in concentration when she plated desserts, the way her eyes sought mine across the steam and noise. Every night, when the restaurant emptied and the staff disappeared, we invented excuses to stay behind. Cleaning the walk-in, reorganizing shelves, updating inventory, any reason to be alone, to stretch out the last moments together before returning to the outside world. In these private hours, we let go of the caution that ruled us during service. She would slide her arms around my waist from behind as I wiped down the stove, her chin resting lightly on my shoulder, the warmth of her breath sending shivers down my spine. I would turn, trapping her between my body and the counter, letting my hands wander beneath her jacket, my lips finding hers in the hush of the darkened kitchen. There were nights we didn't even make it out of our uniforms before giving in to the hunger that simmered between us. She would push me gently against the wall in the pantry, her mouth claiming mine with a ferocity that left me breathless, her hands exploring beneath layers of fabric until she found bare skin. I remember the feeling of her hands slipping under my shirt, the slide of her palms up my stomach, the heat pooling between my legs as her fingers teased and coaxed, each touch a promise and a plea. My need for her felt raw and desperate, an ache I had never known before. The scent of coffee and flour and sweat mingled in the air, grounding me in the now, and I lost myself in the taste of her mouth, the press of her thighs, the sound of her voice moaning my name into my neck. Sometimes we would find stolen moments in the quieter parts of the kitchen. In the small walk-in refrigerator, she would back me against the cold metal shelves, her hands buried in my hair, kisses fevered and clumsy as our bodies pressed together in the half-light. My breath would fog the glass of the door, and I would hold her close, desperate to keep her warmth against me in that chilled space. She was bolder there, her hands sliding beneath my apron, her mouth tracing the line of my jaw, down my throat, until I melted under her touch. It was reckless and exhilarating and terrifying all at once, knowing how easily we could be caught, how thin the walls were, how loudly our hearts beat in the silence. In the evenings, after service, we sometimes slipped out the back door into the alley behind the restaurant, where the world was quiet and forgotten. She would pull me into the shadows, her hands on my hips, our bodies moving together in a clumsy, hungry dance. I'd press her against the brick wall, kissing her until I couldn't breathe, feeling her hands slide beneath my clothes, her fingers quick and sure and desperate. The taste of her, the salt of sweat, the chill of night air on flushed skin, it all became part of the story I lived for, the secret I carried home and replayed in the darkness of my empty bed. Each encounter left me more restless, my skin buzzing with anticipation, my mind crowded with memories I could not escape. I became attuned to every detail of her, her scent on my chef's jacket, The pink flush in her cheeks after a rush, the soft tremble in her hands when she reached for me beneath the table. I started to crave her in ways that unsettled me, my dreams filled with her touch, my waking hours colored by the memory of the last time, the hope of the next. The food I cooked tasted different, as if my own longing had seeped into every sauce and crumb. We learned to communicate in glances and touches, a shared language that no one else could translate. When I felt her watching me from across the kitchen, I stood a little straighter, let my shirt slip off one shoulder, hoping she would notice. When she caught me in the narrow hallway behind the line, her fingers would skim my back, sending jolts through my nerves that lasted all shift. I began to look for her everywhere, in every reflection, every shadow, every quiet pocket of time. Yet there was fear woven into our desire, a constant awareness of what we risked. I worried that someone would see the way I looked at her, would hear the breathless laughter behind closed doors, would notice the marks she sometimes left on my skin. Some nights, as I lay awake in my own bed, I wondered if it was worth it, if this burning need could ever be enough, or if it would one day consume us both. But every morning, I woke up wanting her more, ready to brave the fire just for another taste of what we shared. The kitchen, once a place of control and order, had become a landscape of secrets, charged with the possibility of discovery. Every moment with her was both a gift and a danger. The forbidden flavor of her mouth lingered on my lips long after we parted, a sweetness tinged with the salt of fear. And yet, I found myself hungry for it, again and again, unable to turn away from the one thing I knew I was never meant to have. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It crept in silently, weaving through the kitchen on a Monday morning just as we were unloading crates of produce, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before or any of the nights before that. The routine felt the same, the flash of knives, the swirl of steam, the parade of vegetables sorted and stacked. But beneath the normalcy, a tension pressed in on my skin like a change in the air before lightning. Whispers traveled through the kitchen, low and sharp, too quiet for words but heavy enough to feel. There were glances exchanged when I passed, the kind that slid off my shoulders but never quite disappeared. A question lived behind every polite smile, a wariness in every nod from cooks who once greeted me with easy warmth. I saw her trying to keep her head down, focused on her station, her hands precise as ever, but her jaw was clenched and she didn't look up when I moved through the room. I wanted to reach out, reassure her, but any gesture risked confirming the very thing people were beginning to suspect. Every time we crossed paths, there was a hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. The kitchen's rhythm became erratic. A dropped plate, a forgotten order, voices rising quicker than usual, the constant awareness of eyes watching every move. Even our late nights were changed, the sanctuary of the quiet restaurant replaced by a restless anxiety. We finished our work in silence, cleaning more than necessary, afraid to linger, both of us feeling the weight of the invisible line tightening around us. I watched her from across the room, aching to erase the worry on her face, but she moved away if I got too close, and that distance grew larger each day. It didn't take long before the owner called us in. He was polite, professional, but there was no mistaking the finality in his voice. He didn't ask questions, he simply told us our contracts would not be renewed. There was no accusation, no chance for explanation, just a list of formalities: return your keys, clear out your lockers, collect your last paycheck at the end of the week. I listened, numb, my hands folded in my lap, my mouth too dry to form a protest. She sat beside me, silent, shoulders drawn in tight, her eyes shining with something that was not surprise but resignation. We stood up when dismissed and left together, our footsteps echoing through the empty hallway, the sound louder than anything the owner had said. Outside, the morning was cold and gray. She wrapped her arms around herself, holding back tears, and I found myself unable to comfort her the way I wanted. We walked together to the corner, where her bus would come, but neither of us could speak. I wanted to promise her that it would be all right, that something better would come, that what we shared wouldn't be lost to a handful of rumors and a frightened boss. But the words wouldn't form. Instead, I reached for her hand just once, a small squeeze, a silent apology, and a vow that I would remember everything: the taste of her skin, the press of her body, the heat and laughter we made in the sanctuary of the kitchen. In the days that followed, I moved through the world like a ghost. The kitchen, my life's anchor, my place of mastery and pride, had been taken from me, hollowed out by loss and absence. I lay awake at night replaying each moment, wondering if there had been a way to hide better, to protect her, to protect us. I missed the chaos and the order, the weight of a chef's jacket on my shoulders, the satisfaction of a perfect plate. But most of all, I missed her warmth beside me in the dark, the easy laughter and the bold touch, the way she had taught me how to want again. Sometimes I caught myself standing in the empty kitchen at home, chopping onions, watching my hands move through muscle memory. The smell of herbs would rise and I'd close my eyes, wishing for the background noise of our shared world, the gentle press of her body against mine as we reached for the same spoon. The loss was sharp, but beneath it lay a strange peace, a quiet gratitude for having known such hunger, for having risked everything for one secret season of sweetness. The world did not end. I found another job, smaller and less grand, where no one knew me, and the days passed in quieter repetition. But something in me had changed. The armor I'd worn for decades was gone, melted by the heat of a love that, however brief, had been more real than anything that had come before. When I saw her name in my phone, weeks later, my heart ached and soared at once. We met for coffee, sitting across from each other in a small cafe, and even then the ache between us hadn't dulled. We spoke softly, about new work, about dreams, about how the world had closed a door but not a memory. Her smile was different now, older, sadder, but no less beautiful. I walked home that day with the knowledge that what we'd shared would outlast a job, a scandal, a storm. I carried the memory of her hands and her laughter like a talisman, proof that even in a world that punishes desire, for a little while, I had tasted something true. And even if I never saw her again, even if our story ended not with fireworks but with rain, I knew I would never be the same.